All right, Chelsea fans, welcome back to another episode. That's right, of the London is Blue podcast. Hopefully, your favorite Chelsea podcast out there, and a part of the Men in Blazers Media Network. Dan, one of your hosts here, and boy, oh boy, hot days of summer are here. Chelsea is trying to keep up with that, adding a little heat of their own in the transfer market. And of course, if that is the case, we have to bring in one of our esteemed guests. And it's great, again, to chat with the wonderful, the erudite Ben Jacobs, who is coming to us live from the UK, enjoying a little bit more of the performance of your national team, I imagine, than I am enjoying the crashing out of my national team.
Well, they were nearly the same. I was 30 seconds away from just being under the covers, not doing this podcast. And that was that, done with England. But redemption, we're still there. Fingers crossed for Switzerland. And it's so hot with the transfer window. I've even shaved my head with a view to things getting even hotter in the next few months.
Well, we do know that you'll be stateside, as we were talking about before we jumped on the actual recording here. And so we look forward to having you and a bunch of our other friends back in the U.S. as Chelsea's summer tour kicks off at time of dropping this episode in 20 days. And it feels like there's a lot of work left to do. So we're going to just jump right into it and talk about the fact that Chelsea have done some business so far, both with incomings and outgoings. So we are recording this on the Wednesday after the official announcement earlier in the week that Kieran and desbury-hall has made the move from Leicester City. We obviously knew over the weekend that Omari Kellerman from Aston Villa came through. Mark Gui from Barcelona came through on his €6 million deal as a center forward. And we know that Tosin, the Giant, has been a part of the setup so far on his free transfer from Fulham, and Estevo in the future, one for the future. And then just to recap, too, in the outgoings, we saw the Ian Motson deal go through. The Lewis Hall deal has been confirmed. Omari Hutchinson ends up leaving. Ziyech is done with his free transfer. Thiago Silva is done. And so, I mean, just at a high level, Ben, thinking about where the business is 20 days before the start of the preseason, 3 days into the Enzo Maresca era at Chelsea, how would you rate where Chelsea's business has been so far, keeping in mind what they have left to do?
Well, firstly, I like Tosin the Giant. Is that his official new endorsed Chelsea fan name?
Look, it might be a London is Blue podcast exclusive nickname, but we will try our darndest to make it one that is more widely adopted.
TTG for short. Well, I think Chelsea are in for giant summer. That's the way to look at it. And they're kind of halfway there, in my view. So it's roughly 85 million spent and 85 million brought in, which means the net spend is on track. Club sources say they're comfortable as far as the last financial year is concerned. So we're not likely to be in for any surprises, although, of course, those two hotels that they sold for about 75 million English pounds still need to be ratified under fair market valuation. And on the one hand, they've done a lot of business, but on the other hand, there's still those two gaping positions of a likely right-sided winger and maybe a slightly more experienced or proven centre forward. So the business so far, I think, has been opportunistic, and that's an indication of the fact that perhaps Chelsea saw themselves as not in a position where they desperately needed to sell with a view to PSR, but could go to some of these other clubs like Aston Villa for Omari Kellerman in order to capitalise. And when you're in that position, you can strong arm. So what we've got is actually Chelsea bringing in Kellerman rather than, at the time of recording, Duran from Villa. And Kellerman was the one that Villa really wanted to keep. Whereas with Duran, he's got a very high ceiling, good profile, but there are some question marks over his development and historically, and at Villa, the attitude. Now, I want to make one thing clear. He's a young player, so I don't want to sit here and say everything's on the player. And everyone knows that when you're young, there's an element of immaturity. And when we question attitude, all we really mean is that he's not sat at Villa, which can be a good thing as well, and said, I'll wait for my opportunity. He backs himself. He wants to play. Maybe if he'd have moved to Chelsea, or still could, then you ultimately bring that ego and it can benefit you as a footballer as well. So we're very much talking professionally, but there are some question marks about whether he buys into his Villa pathway and vice versa. Villa are fully invested in Duran, whereas with Kellerman, they wanted to keep him. So that's actually a really big signing for Chelsea, who it's anticipated will be part of the first team squad. And then we know that Mark Guy's come in as well from La Masia. hard to get anyone out of La Masia. And remember, Barcelona had offered him a new deal. And again, he'll be assessed during pre-season, and we wait and see whether the pathway is as a squad player or he gets loaned out somewhere. I still think there'll be a more experienced striker to come between now and when the window shuts. In addition, Tosin, free transfer, giant, as you say, capable of making an impact in both boxes. And remember, Chelsea felt they lacked a little bit of height and also weren't scoring enough goals from set pieces. They've got a new set piece coach in Bernardo Cueva. So Tosin will help give versatility as far as the set plays are concerned. And there's a lot of competition now at centre-back, which is ultimately what Enzo Maresca wants. And more recently, Kiernan Dewsbury-Hall, who is a Leicester fan. I'm gutted he's gone. But what I can tell you is that he is a advanced number 8, which is a newer role. So instead of just viewing him like historically as quite a traditional central box-to-box midfielder, we should now, because it was Maresca that transformed his role, look at him only on last season in terms of the dynamic with which he plays. So the energy and the dynamism is still there, and he can pitch in defensively, but he won't be one of the deeper two in Maresca's 3-man midfield. And the 8s for Maresca get a lot of freedom, and they have to advance into a number 10 role. So I would have thought for Dewsbury-Hall, even though it will be competitive and he may not start every game, the aim will be to try and get double figures as far as goals and assists are concerned, or at least 15 goal contributions, however you want to divvy that up. And because he knows Maresca well, I don't think we're talking about a Danny Drinkwater situation. And note in Dewsbury-Hall's interview, he said he wants to try and emulate N'Golo Kante and make that transition from Leicester to Chelsea and really succeed. So overall, I think Chelsea have done well to get Maatsen out the door, which helps balance the books, to strengthen with depth, to bring in a player that Maresca wanted and knows very well. And now in the second half of the window, you make it a 10 out of 10 by finding that extra striker and probably a winger with a little bit more proven pedigree rather than a young talent for the future.
So a fun question from one of our listeners, Ghana Zagina, was that now that Chelsea have brought in previously from Leicester, Conte, Drinkwater, Chilwell, Fofana, Maresca now, and Dewsbury-Hall, are you willing, is this an opportunity for you to switch allegiances from Leicester City to Chelsea? Is this the last big transfer for Chelsea this summer? Getting Ben Jacobs on a free
allegiance. However, if Chelsea would like to change their badge and put a fox in it, then you never know. I might consider it. But Leicester's my club through and through. I was born there. But of course, great respect for Chelsea. During the Newcastle United takeover, by the way, of PIF, their fans used to joke that I was a Newcastle fan, and someone sent me a mug with a Newcastle logo on and a Leicester logo on, and then a little handshake in between. So if anyone listening wants to send me anything Chelsea, then I'll stick it up somewhere, but always will be a Leicester fan. But it's interesting, isn't it, when you see an opportunity out there? And with Brighton, it's a bit different because they find the young talent and in many ways are the guinea pig, because they bring them in, they give them the game time, the excellent development. And it was Paul Barber, the Brighton CEO, that half jokingly, half serious said, Chelsea are basically at the end of our hose with their mouth open and they're taking whatever they can get. But you can't turn off the tap to the hose. So they can stay there for as long as they like or keep returning to drink. But Brighton feel they're in control of the tap. So they'll always tap into these markets and find the talent. Leicester are a bit different because they have these wonderful facilities that are one of the best in the Premier League. They've got a great academy. So Dewsbury-Hall wasn't found. He was developed and therefore is comparative in many ways to Conor Gallagher, which is why it was such a difficult decision for him to leave even for a big club like Chelsea. And then the other thing is Brighton would like to keep hold of everyone and develop and grow and get into European football season on season. But they accept their model requires them to sell. I don't think Leicester are as much of a selling club until a few years back. And then they go down, they lose Barnes, they lose Maddison, PSR, and as a result, they have to sell. So this is a kind of window where Chelsea have been able to capitalise and ultimately get Maresca and Dewsbury-Hall for relatively good value because Leicester need to balance their books. But remember, dealing with Leicester for Wesley Fofana wasn't easy. When Manchester United came calling for Harry Maguire, they had to pay 80 million. When Chelsea were in negotiations for N'Golo Kante, none of these things were routine. So Leicester's culture is not really as data-driven or is about finding unprovens, raising their value, fattening them up, and then selling them. Obviously not literally, but that's the sort of adage that we always go by, that you fatten up and that allows you to then ultimately sell on. And I think now is just a very atypical period for Leicester. Mm-hmm. And Chelsea have seen that and they've been able to take advantage of it. But if things stabilise at Leicester and then they were to have come calling again for a player like Kiernan Dewsbury-Hall, I think Leicester would be doubling the valuation because they are a very different model to Brighton.
Well, we're going to get into the specific players that Chelsea may be considering across a wide variety of positions as they look to get that 10 out of 10 window that Ben has mentioned. But we're going to take our very first ad break, so stay tuned. We'll be right back. So Ben, when we started the summer, the conversation was that Chelsea were looking across 4 positions for players to bring in and strengthen the side. And that was a striker, a winger, a left back, and a center back. And so we know we've gotten the center back box ticked off. We are still looking at strikers, but it feels like we've kind of missed on a few. And now the list is starting to whittle down, not just for Chelsea, but I think generally across Europe in terms of top talent. There was a winger that we were interested in that isn't happening anymore. So that then changes the dynamic there. And the left back consideration probably also changes on the fact that Marco Correa is having a pretty impressive Euro campaign too. And so I love to go through each of those independently, but maybe just at a top level, is that still Chelsea's objective to go and strengthen those 4 spots, or has any of the calculus changed in the positions they're recruiting for?
No, I think you summed it up really neatly. Striker, likely right-sided winger, because remember, Enzo Maresca's obsessed with wingers rather than wide forwards. And on the left-hand side, he's got Mykhailo Mudryk and Raheem Sterling. And Sterling, should he stay, which is still the expectation at this stage, and certainly the player's preference, when he was at Man City, was very much a wide winger that hugged the touchline, that got white chalk on the boots. So Sterling should thrive in this system, and ultimately the investment in Mudryk means he has to be developed and given time to succeed at Chelsea. So the left side is covered. The right side's a little bit different because Cole Palmer may not play in the front line on the right side. He could actually take the same spot as we've been speaking about earlier with Kiernan Dewsbury-Hall. And you've still got to factor in Christopher Nkunku and Noni Madueke, but there's not necessarily in the traditional winger right-sided mold quite as much as there is on the left-hand side. So that will be a priority. I think that they would be unlikely to add another senior midfielder now that Kiernan Dewsbury-Hall has joined, even if Conor Gallagher departs. It's not unthinkable that they add another centre-back. In fact, I think it's quite likely a left-sided centre-back will be brought in, and we can speak about that in a moment. And then you've got goalkeeper as well. And goalkeeper fascinates me more than any of the other positions because we know that once a number one's been determined, there's a domino effect. So if you're Petrovic and you go from being the end of season number one, and the likely number one had Mauricio Pochettino stayed, to suddenly being number 2, then Chelsea won't want to get rid. And they'll say to Petrovic, you always expected it to take a bit longer, and now you're going to have to fight again. But he may not be that happy because he's got it in his mind. And once goalkeepers get a taste of being number one, they don't always like to go back. Even if they're told in 2-3 years things may change. Robert Sanchez is the most suited to being the number one in Maresca's style, so he may be given an opportunity. But I've got to be honest, and I don't mean this out of any disrespect to Sanchez because we've seen a very small sample, his distribution under pressure when he was the Chelsea number one was very inconsistent. And I suppose the only thing that Maresca will take heart from is I think Sanchez was worse trying to play it longer, at which point it wasn't clean, it wasn't accurate, whereas perhaps with shorter passes under pressure, he'll be better. And Maresca is adamant that you play it short, and if you don't, you'll be substituted. And I can come on to a story I may have told before a little bit later, remind me in the show about Leicester versus Birmingham City and threats being made of a substitution. And then you've got to resolve the situation of Kepa. Gaga Slonina's come back from his loan at Eupen. So if they add another one, then the goalkeepers are going to have to be quite clearly defined. And I don't think a known goalkeeper name like Mamashvili, who's also been linked with Atleti, or Trafford, who Newcastle are working on, are going to come in unless they get that, what I call David Raya guarantee when he walked into Arsenal with Aaron Ramsdale there. And at the time, Arteta said, it's 50-50, there's no number one. And it was obvious in about 5 minutes that Raya was the number one, and he'd been told that all along. So the kind of names that Chelsea are being linked with goalkeepers probably feel like, were they to make the move, they'll have to be given that guarantee. And at the moment, Maresca is saying, I want to rule over the keepers I've got, with it likely that Sanchez will be restored to the number one. And that means Chelsea might have to wait with goalkeepers, because with other positions, you can have the plan heading into the summer, and the manager shouldn't change it greatly because he doesn't have any autonomy or veto. But with goalkeeper, it's a bit different. And I think the recruitment team will bow to the manager's gut instinct on that one, and it will impact later in the window whether they do or don't move for a goalkeeper. So top line, striker, right winger, centre back, possibly left back and young, but it might be one of these kind of players that can either go as a fullback or a centre back. And then again, question mark over whether another goalkeeper will come in.
So great detail on the goalkeeper situation and the fact that Chelsea seem inundated with a lot of options that are not a number one choice at the goalkeeper position, which I imagine makes things very difficult from a, how do you move them all on? How do you get them loans? How do you actually situate them appropriately so that you take the 5 or 6 that you have and get them into a place where they can play and contribute and develop as well? Talking about striker, though, just at the top of it, and we'll kind of work our way then back down. We know that Chelsea missed out on some bigger names. We know that Lukaku is still a player that needs to find a permanent home this summer that is not Chelsea Football Club. We know that there's conversations in Serie A, AC Milan, and Napoli where there may be interest there too. Osimhen is still out there, and it seems like maybe the prices continue to dwindle down as the window continues to progress forward. Where did Chelsea see the opportunity with striker at this point in the market?
Yeah, if we just start with the outgoings briefly, Romelu Lukaku likely to leave. As you say, his preference is to stay in Italy. Roma can't afford the deal. And now, maybe not the case a few years back, people are starting to look at age versus cost, and they're put off by the deal. Napoli's the most interesting one because we might see a domino effect. And if, as expected, Victor Osimhen goes anywhere, they bring in money and they'll need a replacement. And Romelu Lukaku is liked by both Antonio Conte and Giovanni Manna, with the latter being the new sporting director there. And he was one of the names pushing for Lukaku when there were those links with Juventus 12 months ago. So Napoli are likely to approach Chelsea formally for Lukaku, but they don't see the 38 million that Chelsea want as value. So the best way of Chelsea getting their money is Saudi Arabia, and we wait and see whether Romelu Lukaku has changed his mind. And 12 months ago, Al Hilal had an offer accepted for Lukaku for 38 million or 45 million euros. And now Saudi dealmakers are just waiting to see whether Lukaku wants to go there. If not, Italy remains the most likely destination. And then Chelsea are going to have to work out whether they're prepared to cede on value or structure or stick to their guns. But it's not looking likely that Lukaku will be factored into the plans at Chelsea, even under a new manager. I think Amanda Broja is going to go quickly now. That's what I'm told. Those close to Broja insist that negotiations are ongoing with several clubs and they're looking to find a solution relatively fast. As I broke exclusively a few weeks ago, Everton are one of those clubs. And if they can resolve the situation with Dominic Calvert-Lewin and bring in some income, they might be able to move. I think Wolves have cooled a little bit on Broja, but we can't entirely rule them out. And then there's lots of other clubs, including Milan, for example. If they don't get Joshua Zirkzee, they may turn their attention to Broja as well. But wherever he ends up going, and there are lots of options, I think it's going to resolve itself quicker than in the case of Lukaku. And of course, if Chelsea can bring in, let's just call it 35 and 35 for each of those players, then that helps them because they're already at about zero this summer with their net spend. So if you suddenly have another 70 odd million in the bank, it might change their mind about really spending big, either on a right-sided winger or a forward. As far as the strikers are concerned, the most experienced name with pedigree at the moment still in the mix is Jonathan David, who is available at a steal. And I'd keep an eye on Spurs as well. And I'm told that Lille will accept well under 30 million, somewhere around the 30 million euros mark instead of pounds, which is about 25 million quid. So Chelsea could be one to watch there. And this was a name put forwards actually in that crazy January when Graham Potter was still in charge. But at that point, the Lille price was double, and now it's halved. And that's why there's so many suitors. Manchester United and West Ham still can't be discounted as well. So it wouldn't surprise me if Jonathan David ends up in the Premier League. And then with Victor Osimhen, I think Chelsea fans would love that move, of course. And the irony of backing out on Osimhen due to cost won't have been lost on some Chelsea fans because of the links in the last few days with Alexander Isak. And many people were messaging me saying they're being opportunistic by making an inquiry, and it was only cursory. But they still knew, even if they got Isak at a cut price deal, your investment, whether in cash or cash plus player, was going to be well in excess of 85 million. So then why not just go back in the mix if you've got that kind of money for Victor Osimhen, who's probably more attainable than Isak? And lots of people were making that point to me. But the difference is that the overall wages required for Osimhen and agent fees, plus the release clause, makes that deal very difficult. Mm-hmm. So although we cannot 100% rule out Osimhen, it's at about 98, 99% ruled out at this stage. And the only thing that will make it possible is if the price drops. Otherwise, I think at this stage, Osimhen will either go to PSG or to Saudi Arabia. And I know for a fact that Saudi are going to push. 12 months ago, they made not one, not two, but 3 offers for Osimhen to join Al Hilal. And each of the offers, amazingly, came within about 3 hours of the one that he rejected. So he got this out of the blue approach. He just turned it down and thought that was that. And he didn't even know if it was real. And 3 hours later, they doubled it. And he thought, wait a minute. And they put it in writing. And he rejected that. And 3 hours later, a third offer came and it was doubled again. And he almost moved. And I think he said that actually on a podcast about 6 months ago. But Chelsea at the moment not working on Osimhen. There's no suggestion to date that there's going to be some Osimhen-Lukaku swap. But naturally, if Chelsea do go in that direction, they'll want a different structure to the release clause. Sure. And all indications are at the moment that Napoli are sticking to their guns. And that's why Chelsea are not pursuing Osimhen. The same can be said for Julian Alvarez, that Chelsea have discussed him internally, but they're not moving at this point because 1, they don't think that Manchester City want to sell, and 2, to change City's mind, they not only have to get Alvarez buy-in, and it's not advanced, it's not developed to that point, there's been no approach, and on top of that, it's 70 plus million. So not an easy deal to get done. I've heard that they're still discussing Evan Ferguson. I sound like a broken record reporting that. He didn't have the best season last campaign, but maybe that means that the price has dropped a little bit. And then the last name is Rodrigo Muniz, who kind of scored and kept Broja out of the team during his loan spell at Fulham. And nothing again has advanced at this point because Chelsea are prioritising a left-sided centre-back or a full-back and even a right winger at this stage. And this is basically because a lot of the names that they're looking at for the striker are maybe involved with either the Copa America or the Euros. So they have to be a little bit more patient on that front. And maybe they wanted to get into this financial year anyway to have their big spend from after June the 30th rather than before it. So that's kind of where we're at with the striker at the moment. And I would still be surprised if by the end of the window, we don't see a slightly more proven or older or Premier League type name come to Chelsea along with the youngsters that they've already signed.
It feels as if there's still a bet on Nico Jackson as the number one to have another step up season after having a really strong campaign in his debut season in the Premier League. So that has to factor into it as well. You mentioned right wing again, so we could go there. It is, as it relates to right-sided winger, we know obviously the Elise deal kind of collapsed. So it seems like Byron is having trouble kind of getting that finalized and finished as well. So I don't know. It seems like the deal was always going to be difficult, regardless of which team was involved on the other side. But who are Chelsea looking at now, considering that they missed out after 2 attempts on the player that they really wanted, and have to consider, one of those more proven players who maybe balances out the attack for Maresca a little bit better?
Yeah, the first thing to say is when we talk about a right winger, there is that element of versatility. So they're not categorically saying right only. It's just somebody that can either play on both sides or offer support on the right side, because that's the slight preference due to what I said earlier about Sterling and Mudryk. So with Elise, that will happen with Bayern. I don't think the deal is in doubt, even though, as you say, it's not done yet at the time of recording. And from Chelsea's point of view, they argue the overall cost was just too high. But I think the reality is that Elise wanted to join Bayern, and he gets to play Champions League football. He gets the wage he wants. And as importantly, my understanding is that they're prepared to let him play at the Olympic Games. He's in Thierry Henry's provisional squad, whereas we'll never know. But my gut feeling is that Chelsea would have blocked him going to the Olympics, because it sends the wrong message if they let Elise play, having told Benoit Badiashile and Malo Gusto they can't go. And yeah, I know Leslie Okwuchukwu is in that provisional squad as well, but that probably shows you that he's seen as more a player for the future that might get sent out on loan, whereas the senior Chelsea players, such as Badiashile and Gusto, not allowed to go to the Olympics. It's the same with other countries as well. Like Enzo Fernandez said that he was desperate to go to the Olympics and wasn't allowed to go. So if they made an exception for Elise, it wouldn't have gone down well. And I think that Bayern were able to use the fact that Elise can go to the Olympics as another thing within their favour. Other wingers, and I'm speaking left, right, or both at this point, because I don't think they're so rigid in saying right only. I just think that it's right favourably. And we know that Chelsea have already ruled themselves out of Nico Williams. And that is because even though there's a relatively market value release clause of around 45 million, you got to pay the taxes and the wages on top. And he's not going to move like for like on wages either. He's going to want an increase. So the wages are well in excess of 200,000 English pounds a week, because at the moment he's on 200,000 euros, plus the fact he's really settled at his club. So then when you add agent fees, plus taxes, plus the release clause, all of it is a very high outlay. And it's not just Chelsea. I think Arsenal are put off by exactly the same thing. I still wouldn't rule out a move for Crescencio Somerville, who will be available for between 35 and 40 million. But because Leeds sold Archie Gray, and now the financial deadline has passed, they're in a stronger position to try and rebuff it. But I am told that if the player said he wanted to leave for a big Premier League club like Chelsea, then at the right price, Leeds wouldn't stand in his way. I'm also told, coming back to Brighton again, that Karu Mitoma is liked. And then we can't rule out players such as Georgi Sudakov either, who Chelsea have not made an advanced move for yet. But a few months ago, Shakhtar were in London and they were pitching Sudakov. And they spoke to Arsenal, to Tottenham, to West Ham, to Newcastle, and to Chelsea. So nothing has advanced yet. But as Chelsea assess what direction they want to go in, that might be another player to keep an eye on. And then the last name that I would throw into the mix is Antonio Nusa, who Chelsea have been linked with before. And he was really close to joining Brentford, but unfortunately during the medical had some complications. There's not really a fear from suitors that he's not going to be attainable or that he's going to struggle for fitness, because the back and knee problems that he had, when teams have done their due diligence, don't appear to be so chronic or so worrying that he's not going to have a great career ahead of him. But Brentford have not come back in. There's a feeling that Brighton might, and also Spurs. So Chelsea may have to move quickly if they want to enter that race. And we wait and see, because that would be another young player. And I think what would put them off Nusa is the fact that in that position, and proven by the fact that they went for Elise, they probably want a bit more experience. So I would expect them, if they are to spend big in that position, to not necessarily be looking at teenagers or early 20s type players. Or if they do go in that direction, there'll be ones from the Premier League that have maybe played a bit more games at the top level than Nusa has, even though he is a top talent.
Well, we're going to take our last ad break. When we come back, we're going to talk about the left side of the defense and where Chelsea might be going there. And also, there's a couple of Chelsea women transfer updates we want to get into, but we'll do that right after this break. So stay tuned. So, Ben, as we continue moving further and further back the pitch, we talked a little bit about the defense, and we know that the left side of either the center back or a left back is also kind of a part of Chelsea's thought process for this window. You know, the left back one is super interesting because you see Ian Matson leave, you see Lewis Hall leave, you have Chilwell, who, you know, was injured for parts of the season last year, really, you know, was used at left wing at points in the season, and you know, maybe did not end the campaign the way that he would have wanted. Mark Cucurella having a very strong end to his campaign, having a really, I think, fantastic Euros so far, and maybe changing how he's being viewed at the club. Where are Chelsea at with the addition from the left side defense, either from a left back or a center back perspective?
Yeah, they're looking at different names, either centre backs that can play on the left side, but still the expectation is that Levi Colwill will hold that position. And if somebody supplants him in the pecking order, then it'll be interesting to see what the Colwill stance is. So the recruitment team are looking at, one, adding another centre back on the left side that maybe has the versatility to play on the left side, and two, signing a young fullback. So with the young fullback, Milos Kirkos is still there on the radar, and Manchester United and Arsenal are considering him as well. They really like Yorel Hatto as well, who is expected to stay at Ajax. He was a big Arsenal target, and I think Chelsea realised that there's a very low chance of succeeding there because of the player's preference. And that's why they've not advanced anything, whereas Arsenal seriously explored that deal. But I do think that he won't be going anywhere this summer. With Kirkos, though, coming back to the Bournemouth star, he's been at the Euros, he's back now. Bournemouth don't want to sell, and they value him at over 35 million. And I think they paid about 15 million for him. So you can understand why they would want a profit in excess of 20 million if they were to sell. So that one still remains a possibility. Chelsea are not prioritising this young left back at the moment for the reasons that you mentioned. Mark Cucurella's form has been excellent. You've got Ben Chilwell, and you've got Levi Colwill ultimately that could play there too. So there is enough cover, even though Matson and Hall have both departed to Villa and Newcastle respectively. But I do think that Chelsea are looking for somebody in that Malo Gusto mould, but on the left side, that can maybe come in the next 2 or 3 years, because they're 2 or 3 years younger than a Cucurella or a Chilwell. And that's when you start having staggered recruitment. And well-run clubs don't sign out of need. They sign before they need, and then the player has time to integrate. And I think Liverpool do that best. So what do Liverpool want this window? A wide player. Why? Because they know in the long run that Luis Diaz might go and that Mo Salah might leave in a year's time. So if you bring that name in now, you've got a 1, if not 2 years of transition. And then you almost forget the need to strengthen because nobody's talking about it, because you've always got enough cover. And I think Chelsea feel like that could be the case if they bring in another young left back now. With the centre back that can also play left back, Riccardo Calafiori is the big one to watch, and he's in demand. 22 years of age, capped by Italy, physical, cultured on the ball, and has had plenty of game time. I think that he played over 30 times for Bologna last season. They qualified for the Champions League. But prior to that, he was playing over 30 times for Basel in the Swiss Super League. He'd had a loan spell at Genoa, and he'd had Serie A football for Roma as well, which, considering he's only 22, shows you that this is a seriously seasoned footballer. He's mature, he's a leader, he's good with set pieces, he's 6'2", so he's got a little bit of everything. And then when the kind of player like him gets bred playing fullback or centre back, it forces them to be very good on the ball and technical, to get forwards, to play a progressive pass, to think a bit quicker. And he's got everything in his locker. And this is why Chelsea are there, but Arsenal are too. And at the moment, I would say it's a 50-50 race. I think he's going to cost 50 million euros, something in that ballpark. And I don't think price will be the issue at the end of the day, because Bologna will accept if the player wants to move, and they will not price him so astronomically that, in my opinion, he's out of either Chelsea or Arsenal's budget. So this one, I think, will just come down to the pitch and the player's decision. And at the time we're recording, Arsenal appear to be pushing a bit more aggressively than Chelsea, but we said that with Mudryk, and of course the player ended up eventually joining Chelsea, not Arsenal.
So as we kind of wind down on just maybe the Chelsea men's business, I think there's the other thought around just a couple of the outgoings. We knew that there was a push to get some outgoing deals done before the 30th to account for last year's sales, and now there's maybe a little bit of less pressure to move on players to try to find maybe the right fit and the right value that Chelsea feel matches what their expectation of how the player is valued. Is your thought that Chelsea would still likely move on players like Trev Chalobah and Conor Gallagher this summer, or are there other players that you would expect maybe to kind of make a move, or will those players not make a move?
Well, I would say David Fofana could be for sale, and that might be the first real evidence of this model where we've said it before. If the players succeed, then they do well for Chelsea and they become investments, not expenses. If the players don't succeed for Chelsea, they get moved on. And then hopefully, financially, it's still a success. So you dine off your successes and you dine off, I'm not going to call them failures, but the players that are not deemed of the right standard for Chelsea because you've raised the valuation. And David Fofana hasn't been at Chelsea long. So were they to sell him for more than both they've paid, plus, of course, the wages and any other costs that they classify around that signing, whether it's agent fees or accommodation, things like flights, food, anything that counts under the player, because otherwise you've not actually made anything from it. You might be able to declare it on the books as if it's profit for that 1 year, but you've still ultimately taken other things that you've had to spend on the player. So this might be an example if David Fofana goes, having only been at Chelsea for a short time. And what it will prove is that they are actually signing players at value. And as a consequence, they're raising almost instantaneously, even just by being at Chelsea. And with David Fofana, he hasn't really been at Chelsea because he's been at Union Berlin and then Burnley. So he could go without really having an opportunity at Chelsea. And that sort of just shows you that there's this big influx of players because of the fact that if there's value to be had, do it. And that's part of the logic behind Mark Guy as well. Only 5 million. There's no way, whether he succeeds or fails, that Chelsea are going to do anything other than benefit either on the football field or financially by bringing a player over. And when you have that philosophy, you just have to be careful that the players don't think you're overstocking, because as soon as the footballer feels that they're being treated as a commodity rather than being developed as a human being, that's when they might think that they're better suited to other projects. However, every young footballer has that self-belief and that swagger and that feeling that they're going to be the one to break through and wear the Chelsea shirt and succeed and become the next Drogba or whoever. And that's why players ultimately want to come to Chelsea, because the history and the culture and their own self-belief, even at a young age, that they can win things. With Trevor Chalobah, who's been there longer and knows the Chelsea culture past and present, he's in no rush to leave. So from Chelsea's point of view, they will accept an offer for somewhere in the region of 25 million. And I'm told Chalobah will be very picky and will only go for European football. So suggestions that Murillo would come to Chelsea, and that is another target we should mention, by the way, as far as defenders are concerned, and then Chalobah would go the other way, were wide of the mark to my knowledge, because Chalobah's made it very clear that he'll leave England but it has to be for a Big Five league team plus European football, and ideally Champions League football. So Bayern was a move that he wanted. It could still be one to watch, but he's not just going to go somewhere because Chelsea say, we've had an offer and we think you should take it. He would rather actually be a squad player and fight for his place. And on current form, based on last season, if Maresca's got an open mind and he looks statistically at the players that warrant selection, you can still make an argument that Chalobah will be a starter in the first game of next season, even if Wesley Fofana's fit and others. So it'd be interesting to see how Maresca judges his centre-backs when there's so many of them. But Chalobah's not itching to leave. And then with Conor Gallagher, he's put it out of his head, I'm told, because he's at the Euros at the moment. And we know that Chelsea will sell at the right price. And saying that, again, makes me sound like a broken record because nothing's changed. And the reason for that is because the Euros is happening at the moment. And Gallagher doesn't want to be distracted. But Kiernan Dewsbury-Hall's arrival is going to make it even harder for Gallagher because we know that if Enzo Fernandez and Moises Caicedo are fit, they're going to be the deeper midfielders. And Moises Caicedo is your destroyer. And Enzo Fernandez in this Maresca system is your Toni Kroos-style player, a defensive playmaker, but with a bit of freedom to get forwards. And it might well be that Caicedo also is told, get more box-to-box, because Maresca demands attacking numbers. He did the same with Wilfred Ndidi and Harry Winks. And then Gallagher becomes in competition with Carney Chukwuemeka, with potentially Cole Palmer, with potentially Christopher Nkunku, and it's very congested. And we've not even mentioned Romeo Lavia either. So there's a lot of midfield competition. Leslie Okwuchukwu is there as well. Andre Santos is part of the squad too. So Gallagher may feel like his game time is limited and perhaps is less of a fit compared to some of the other players that I've mentioned in this Enzo Maresca system. And that will all lead Chelsea to at least wait until the window shuts and welcome any offers. And then if they come, it will be up to Gallagher. I think Villa can't afford Gallagher at the moment, even though it's true that they made an exploratory approach. And even though we've entered into a new financial year, something's got to still give there if they're to make their move at the price Chelsea want. Atletico Madrid made a very informal offer, and it was only, to my knowledge, about 20 million, which is way less than Chelsea's valuation. So nothing's doing there. And Athletic sources tell me they're no longer in active negotiation. So that really only leaves Spurs at the moment. And I do think, even with Archie Gray joining Tottenham, that they will still be in the mix for Conor Gallagher. And their valuation is the same as it was 12 months ago, somewhere around 35 million. Whereas Chelsea are saying that Gallagher should go for the same price as Mason Mount moved to Manchester United for, a 55 million total package, with both having the same amount of time left on their contract at the time Mount exited versus Gallagher now. So we wait and see whether something gives. Logically, you'd think 40, 45 million might do it and a compromise could be reached. But Chelsea are quite bullish at the moment. They're either going to stick to their valuation or they are prepared to keep Gallagher. And then when the window shuts, if he's playing in the Maresca system and doing well and offering leadership, then who's to say that a new contract won't at that point be offered? But right now, the situation is exactly as it has been for months. Nothing advanced with a new Gallagher deal. Chelsea want 50 to 55 million. Chelsea welcoming offers. Tottenham are likely to bid. Gallagher to come back from the Euros, speak to Enzo Maresca, and then decide what he wants to do with his future, because he's a player in all of this as well. If he says, I'm Chelsea through and through, we note the banner that was up against Spurs, and Gallagher looked really emotional. Maybe he doesn't want to go to Spurs. Maybe he wants his contract to run down. Maybe like Chalobah, he's not just going to leave because Chelsea want him to. So the player will always be a factor in all of this. But at this stage, because of the Euros and a lack of formal bids, nothing has really changed on the Gallagher front, but there is still a realistic possibility that he could depart this summer.
Switching gears as we kind of wind down on the men's team conversation, Sonia Bonpastor has obviously started as well at Chelsea. So a change in era on both the men's and the women's side for who is coaching both of those teams. But we have two deals that are either finalizing or have been officially announced at time of recording. You mentioned the news about Lucy Bronze coming in on a free on Twitter with the deal, entering there, had interest from NWSL clubs, but makes the move to Chelsea. And then another player from Barcelona, Julia Bartel, coming in as well, the 20-year-old midfielder. So Chelsea and Bonpastor are getting some reinforcements as we see players like Lupol to announce today that they're leaving, heading to Real Madrid. So that side also being refreshed at the moment with the transition in manager.
Yeah, I'm really excited to see how Sonia Bompasta fares. And of course, Chelsea are coming to America to play Gotham over the summer in the middle of August. And they're raiding Barcelona. They're not the only club, by the way, because Mariona Caldente joined Arsenal this week as well from Barcelona. But Chelsea have got one, and they might be able to get another as well. So at the time of recording, the official one is the 20-year-old Spanish midfielder Julia Bartel, who signed a 3-year deal, and there's a 1-year extension as well. And she's a very technically gifted player with high intelligence. She moves well into pockets of spaces. She's vocal on the field and has got a big future ahead of her. And I think she'll take very well to the style and pace of the WSL. What I've seen from her in the last year is much more calmness and maturity on the ball, and her progressive passing numbers are up. And she's a pretty fierce tackler as well. So there's a little bit of everything about her, but she's improved what I think are the kind of metrics that you don't always see because they're not direct in a goal, but they're that pass or two before it. And I know that might sound a really strange thing to say, but every time you see a replay, think at the point the replay starts. It might be a wide player running for a few seconds, passing it on the edge of the box, and then ultimately crossing it or shooting and scoring. But before that, in the center of the park, you often see a quick diagonal pass or winning the ball in a 50-50 or getting to a second ball. And then 6-7 passes later, the goal comes. And that's the kind of thing she does, that unsung work that is progressive and is attacking. But it's not necessarily the thing that you're going to see in all of the replays when you're watching Chelsea. And I've just been really impressed by her. I've watched quite a lot of her. She didn't actually play that much for Barcelona in the A team, but was heavily involved in their B team and can score a few goals as well. So big prospect, and I'm looking forward to see how she fares. And she's also, I think, been capped by the Spanish under-23 team as well. So this is a player that Chelsea can develop. And I just think that it's an investment, like with the men's team, into some of the top talent that can be secured at value. And I think I'm right in saying she's a free transfer because her contract had ended at Barcelona. So that's another little win as far as Chelsea are concerned. And then the box office name that might divide Chelsea opinion because of previous affiliations, Lucy Bronze, is in advanced talks with Chelsea to sign what's understood to be a 2-year deal with a 1-year option. And it'd be interesting to see by the time people hear this whether the deal is fully over the line. And Bronze has attracted interest as well from the NWSL. I'm told Orlando were one of the teams. I believe Kansas City owned the discovery rights for Bronze, but were not moving to try and bring her there. But Gotham took a look without advancing, and Orlando very seriously explored the possibility. But Chelsea are in advanced talks, and they are expected to get this one over the line. And Bronze, in the end, was happy to leave Barcelona, even though she was offered a contract extension. And the reason for that is because she wants to play regularly. And there was no guarantee of that because the Spanish fullback Onebatia is at Barcelona in Bronze's position. So coming back to England is probably the most natural thing for Bronze at her age, and the opportunity to play for Chelsea and in the Women's Champions League. And the intriguing thing for me that I've heard, and let's see whether it manifests, is that she won't just be utilised as either a right back or an inverted right back. The pitch to her is that she'll get some game time in midfield as well. And because Melanie Leupolz has left for Real Madrid, and that's been announced recently, there is a bit more depth needed in the centre of the park. So we might see Bronze the fullback, Bronze the inverted fullback, or Bronze, the midfielder at Chelsea. And that versatility is of benefit to Chelsea. And it's another reason, I think, why she's attracted by the project.
Oh, it's a hope that bronze can turn into gold under Bompastor and Chelsea continue to find winning ways under a new leadership heading into the next season. But I think exciting times on the women's side, very interesting time ahead in the men's side, particularly with, again, 20 days at time that people are listening to this until the start of the preseason in the U.S. in Santa Clara when Chelsea take on Wrexham. So plenty of work still left to do, but a pathway to potentially having a 10 out of 10 window, as Ben alluded to, if we can get some of the work done. But that's going to do it for this episode. So again, thank you a ton, Ben, for giving all the listeners a wonderful deep dive into everything going on with Chelsea. Hopefully, I will see you here in New York City at the later point of the summer for that Chelsea women's game, so we can enjoy a beer or two beforehand together. And we hope you, the wonderful listeners, enjoy this episode as well. So we'll keep you updated. For those who are listening on the holiday, have a wonderful 4th of July to our wonderful U.S. listeners. And for those in the rest of the world, enjoy just a regular Thursday afternoon in July. But that's going to do it for this episode. So until next time, Chelsea fans, you know what to do. Keep the blue flag flying high.